The date is October 25th, 1415, and on a muddy field in northern France, something impossible is about to happen. 25,000 French soldiers, dukes, counts, barons, the absolute cream of European nobility, are staring down at 6,000 Englishmen, and they're already planning how to divide up the ransom money. The French are rested, well-fed, fighting on their own soil, and outnumbering the enemy more than 4-1. Across from them, mostly peasant longbowmen with wooden stakes and boots caked in filth. Many are sick. Some haven't slept in days. Their king, Henry V, is literally feverish. The French aren't looking at this as a battle. They're looking at it as an execution or formality. By sunset, 10,000 Frenchmen will be dead, including some of the most powerful nobles in all of Europe, and the English will have lost only 400 men. 400. Let that sink in. How does a starving, disease-ridden army absolutely shatter the finest knights in Europe? How does one exhausted English soldier survive what 25 armored French knights could not? And what was on that field? Something in the mud itself that dragged men under, that even the wealthiest, most protected warriors couldn't escape. Because here's the thing, those longbowmen fired so many arrows the sky literally turned black. But that's not what won the battle. Henry V made a move that looked suicidal, but he wanted the French to charge. He needed them to take the bait. He was hiding a weapon the French weren't ready for. And when they thought they were charging a line of helpless peasants, they were actually charging straight into a trap that would become a graveyard. So why did France, the most powerful kingdom in Europe, walk directly into the deadliest choke point of the century? By the end of this, you'll know exactly how it happened. Drop a comment, smash that like button, and subscribe, because this is Agincourt, where 6,000 broken soldiers destroyed France's pride and forged the legend of a king. Let's rewind. England and France had been locked in the 100 Years' War for decades, fighting over crowns, land, and dynasty. By 1415, England was weak. Plagues, political coups, bankrupt kings, none of it was going well. But then you had Henry V, young, focused, and deadly serious about restoring English honor. He needed a victory, and he needed it fast. So he did the unthinkable. He invaded France. In August of 1415, Henry landed his forces and laid siege to the port city of Harfleur. He took it, but the victory came at a brutal cost. Disease ripped through his army. Supplies vanished. Men collapsed in the mud. Hundreds died of dysentery. And by October, his campaign was dying with them. The smart move? Retreat. Get back to England. Regroup. Try again another year. But France had other plans. The French assembled a juggernaut. We're talking 10,000 knights, armored nobles who trained their entire lives for hand-to-hand combat, 4,000 mounted cavalry, fast and disciplined, built for devastating shock attacks, 6,000 heavy men at arms with swords, poleaxes, and maces, veterans who knew how to kill, 2,000 crossbowmen, and another 3,000 archers and levies, 25,000 warriors in total. And they weren't just trying to stop an invasion. They wanted revenge. Revenge for Crécy. Revenge for Poitiers. Humiliations that France had been carrying for 70 years. Henry started marching toward Calais, his closest English stronghold, hoping to make it out alive. But the French raced ahead and cut him off. They weren't hunting an army anymore. They were hunting a cornered king. The night before the battle, October 24th, Rain hammered down on the fields of Agincourt. The mud thickened into this sticky, suffocating glue. The English shivered under soaked tents or just slept in the open with no food, no warmth, no comfort. Meanwhile, in the French camp, the nobles were feasting. Wine, bread, roasted meats. They sang. They laughed. They were celebrating a victory they hadn't even won yet. Some of them were polishing their armor for what they thought would be a parade. Henry gathered his captains that night and told them, "We may die tomorrow, but if we die fighting." The English camp went silent after that. No songs, no boasts, just the rain and the distant sound of French laughter echoing across the valley. When dawn broke, Henry formed his men into a single, narrow line. It wasn't ideal, but the land forced his hand. 6,000 men stood between two dense forests, creating this corridor that was barely wide enough for a few hundred soldiers to stand abreast. It was a bottleneck, a natural killing ground. The French had the numbers, but they couldn't wrap around the English position. They could only smash straight ahead. The Longbowmen hammered wooden stakes into the mud at an angle, like the jaws of some primitive beast waiting to snap shut. On the other side, the French deployed in waves. The front line was 10,000 dismounted knights who'd been forced off their horses because of the mud and the cramped terrain. Behind them, 6,000 men at arms stood in deep ranks, ready to push the assault forward. On each flank, 2,000 cavalry waited to crush the English archers. At the rear, the crossbowmen and remaining archers formed the reserve. It was a human wall tightening the valley into a funnel of bodies and iron. And then nothing happened. The two armies just stared at each other. The French expected the English to sit there, starve, and eventually collapse. Henry knew that waiting meant the same thing, a slow death. So he made a move that shocked everyone. He ordered his banners forward. The English longbowmen yanked their stakes out of the ground, advanced several dozen paces closer to the French, and drove the stakes back into the mud. It was an insult, a challenge, a message the French couldn't ignore. You could see the French scrambling to reorganize, horses snorting and slipping in the thick clay, nobles shouting orders. But Henry had one more surprise. He'd hidden 200 longbowmen in the woods on the flanks, and when the French were still adjusting their lines, those archers opened fire from the tree line, a sudden storm of arrows tearing into shields, into horses, into plate armor, and the archers were making hunting calls, mocking the nobles they were killing. French pride snapped. Someone in the front ranks screamed the order to charge, and the tidal wave began to move. On each wing, 2,000 mounted French nobles surged forward, hooves sinking deep, horses slipping, riders fighting just to stay upright as the mud tried to drag their mounts down. But they pushed on, trying to swing around and crush the English longbowmen from the sides. They galloped straight into a hurricane of arrows. Visors were pierced. War horses were shot down mid-stride. Panicked riders crashed into their own infantry, wrecking chaos in the second line before it even joined the fight. The French cavalry, which was supposed to win the flanks and turn the tide, collapsed in minutes. Meanwhile, the main French assault, 10,000 dismounted knights, pushed toward the English stakes under relentless arrow fire. The arrows didn't always pierce the plate armor, but they shattered joints, cut through tendons, crushed windpipes. By the time these knights reached the stakes, they were already bleeding, already exhausted, and then the sheer mass of their charge slammed into the English line, and the trap snapped shut. English men at arms braced behind the stakes, striking downward at knights who were trapped and couldn't maneuver. The Longbowmen, who'd been holding back, started loosing volleys over the heads of their own soldiers, hammering the French ranks as they stumbled forward. Here's the thing about armor. The French wore the best plate money could buy, but in that mud, it meant immobility. The English wore mail and leather, and in that moment, it meant survival. Then the second French wave hit. 6,000 heavy men at arms slammed into the rear of their own knights, and instead of reinforcing the attack, they buried it. The French were crushing themselves. Henry saw it happening and whispered to his captains, "Hold, let them come." And they came, helpless, blind, sinking deeper into the mud with every step. That's when the English longbowmen dropped their bows, grabbed axes and mallets and knives, and rushed in from the flanks. They were nimble in the mud, carving into this mass of armored bodies that couldn't even turn to face them. The valley became a grinder. Knights were drowning face down in their own armor. Henry himself fought in the front ranks, and the French rear guard, 5,000 crossbowmen, archers, and levies, just watched it all unfold. They had a choice: advance into that nightmare or retreat. They froze. They'd never seen their nobles die like this. The collapse started suddenly. Those who could stand staggered backward. Those who couldn't were swallowed by the mud, by the bodies, by the weight of their own armor. The third French line, the reserve, watched the disaster and chose not to die in it. They withdrew without ever striking a blow. By early afternoon, the field was silent. 10,000 French dead, 400 English lost. A 25-to-1 casualty ratio that defied every law of medieval warfare. Agincourt didn't just break a French army. It unleashed the longbow as the terror weapon of its age, shattered the confidence of a kingdom, and proved that discipline, mud, and English steel could humble Europe's richest nobles. And at the center of it all stood Henry V, young, feverish, unyielding, a king forged in the mud who reshaped the balance of the 100 Years' War. If you made it this far, drop a like, subscribe, and check out the next video because history's full of impossible battles, and we're just getting started.